Horus Lupercal is regarded as one of the greatest Primarchs to have ever have existed, or at least to have ever have waged war in the Emperor's name. He is given the title of Warmaster after the Ulinar campaign, and that is something that really kind of sets the pace for what becomes the Horus Heresy. And in this video today, I want to discuss that title, the Warmaster. I want to discuss Horus Lupercal. I want to discuss what it would be like if Horus Lupercal was not the Warmaster. What if one of his other brothers were to ascend in his stead? We know through a number of books up to this point in the Horus Heresy that Horus Lupercal has kind of voiced his own self-doubt and his own kind of lack of confidence in his decision to be, or the Emperor's decision to become the Warmaster. So in this video, I want to talk about three prime individuals as other candidates for the Warmaster. But we have to kind of look at what it means to be the Warmaster. Horus Lupercal is considered to be the first, well, not considered, he is the first Primarch to really fall under the Emperor's wing, the first one to be discovered, and the first one and the one to spend the most time with the Emperor. And we know that the time in between Horus, I guess, re-illumination back into the Imperium, and the next Primarch was actually a considerable amount of time. Horus was very close to the Emperor, it's weird to say the word geographically when you're talking about space, but as far as distance goes, he was very close to where the Emperor was, and he was discovered very early. And this allowed him to go very close to the Emperor, and in doing so, if you read stuff like The Master of Mankind, you see that the Emperor definitely kind of looked at the Primarchs more as tools. But you could say that the closest thing to a son would be Horus because of his just longevity of being with him. Now, there's a lot of stuff we're going to cover in this video, and a lot of it will be spoilers. A lot of it will be relative conjecture, too. I mean, no one outright says in any of these books, it is a fact, 100%, this guy would have made a better Warmaster. So, I'm also taking certain angles that really fit my point of views of all three of these Primarchs that we're about to talk about. So if you do have a conflicting viewpoint, please, by all means, share it. I'm not going to be 100% right here, but I am going to talk about a lot of stuff across a lot of different books here, so please try to bear with me, as this might expose you to stuff that A, you've not read, B, you have no idea what's going on, or C, you just don't fucking get it. So I'm going to try to break it down as best I can. So let's go into our three candidates here, the Warmasters elect for the Warmaster position. Now, for those of you that have read The Unremembered Empire, you will notice these three names. I'm going to be looking at Lionel Johnson, the Lion, the Primarch of the First Legion of the Dark Angels, Sanguinius, the Primarch of the Blood Angels, and then Guilliman, or Bobby G as I like to call him, the Primarch of the Ultramarines. Now, each one of these has qualities that are very indicative of what it means to be the Warmaster. But at the same time, they have a lot of qualities that conflict against that. And we'll talk about that either in the conclusion of the video or in each one of their individual sections. It's just going to depend on how I riff. Now, to be the Warmaster, of course, means that you are imbued with all of the might. You are the word of the Emperor. The Warmaster title was given to Horus at the end of the Ulinar campaign to kind of say, hey, I am returning to Terra to continue my holy work, but it is your job to continue the prosecution of the Great Crusade across the entire galaxy, is to create the kind of empire that will be fostered. You, Horus, will lead the rest of your brothers in this conquest. And during the Ulinar campaign, when this is kind of assigned, there's a lot of doubt that's kind of shrouded in this moment. Where is the Emperor going? Even Horus asks, where is the Emperor going? Has the Emperor abandoned me? And that creates the cracks in Horus's character armor, which eventually leads to his downfall. Horus's big kind of, I guess, his crux, his Achilles heel, Horus's heel, is his ego. And you see throughout the first three books of the Horus Heresy that Horus has a very great command of men. He has a great command of armies, of battle fleet tactics, and any kind of conflict amongst the stars. But you can see that he at the end of the day, he still has a bit of petulance stuck into him. He is still that kind of child that is very much vying for the love and not love and affection. I'm sorry, that was a little too sweeping in my wording there. The approval or the acceptance of his father. And the Emperor of Mankind is somewhat kind of aloof, that we find out in some of the later books, especially with Master of Mankind. So we can see that in Horus, where he does want that approval, and this kind of eventually leads to his downfall on I almost said Davin, the planet in which he fell to chaos. But even on his deathbed, he even says Sanguinius should have got this, or Bobby G maybe should have done it because with his great command of empires, or Lionel Johnson who was right behind him in line. So let's go into each three of our candidates, talk about some of the traits that make these individuals who they are, how they would have maybe resisted the forces of chaos in the way that the Warmaster of Horus did not, or how they maybe even would have fallen to chaos, how that would have actually gone. So let's start off with our first one, going really in order here, starting with the Master of the First Legion, Lionel Johnson. Now, the Dark Angels have a pretty wide-sweeping kind of fame attached to them. When they were at their largest, I guess you could say, total unit count, they were heralded as one of the most perfect legions. Even Lionel Johnson is regarded as this brilliant tactician and this amazing strategist, but he is somewhat aloof, very similar to the way his father is. And it's interesting how every single one of these Primarchs kind of has like a second that they always kind of look at, right? Lorgar has Erebus, Angren has Karn, the Mournival is there for Horus, and this is a different time in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. This is Warhammer 30,000, and this is a time when there's more secular thought. There's no veneration of the Emperor as a god, and that's intentional. There is this veneration of the Emperor as a individual, not as a god. And thusly, the Space Marines are not as dogmatic. They're not as drummed with, right and routine and stuff like that. So as a result, these Primarchs look to these seconds and commands almost as some form of equerry, and that's how some of these guys have a title of equerry. Now, Lionel Johnson has Luther, and Luther is essentially the gentleman who raises him. Lionel Johnson is found at the ripe age of 12 on the planet of Caliban. Now, what would make him a great Warmaster? Well, all these traits we've just talked about. I mean, he's able to prosecute war in its entirety, and he, above all else, is willing to do what it takes to get the job fucking done. And that is very important. There is a changer of ways, that a greater demon of Tzeentch, Cairo's Fate Weaver, that tries to tempt the mighty Lionel Johnson away from the Imperium and into chaos. And he even said, he just, without batting an eyelash, is like, no, loyalty is its own reward. And so you have this Warmaster who would be extremely loyal. He would be able to prosecute tons and tons of victories, and that's what he did. Second to Horus, he was able to accomplish he was able to accomplish more victories than any other legion. And with that, that's what put him second in line to Horus for the Warmaster title. In fact, a lot of other Primarchs were very surprised that Lionel Johnson didn't get it. When the Rangdan Xenocide happened, which was this really huge event, and I'll go into it in its own video because it is a pretty substantial situation that happens during the Great Crusade. It lowered the units, or the legion size of the Dark Angels significantly. It cost them quite a few casualties, and this forced them to kind of put a stall on their Great Crusading, as it were. They had to rebuild their gene stocks and rebuild all their troops. Now, when you take a look at this, though, sure, victories. Okay, the Warmaster needs to be able to do this. He's got to be able to just, range across the entirety of the galaxy. But even some of the other legionnaires in the other legions remarked at how amazing Lion's presence was. And that goes into some of the nascent psychic abilities that Lionel Johnson has, where he has this predatory sense, where he can always sense who's around him and sense what people are saying to see if it's even truth. And that kind of makes him a step removed from other people. And this creates the kind of wedge, or I guess the reason that he wouldn't be the best Warmaster as a result. He is rather removed from his brothers, whereas Horus is on great terms with pretty much everyone. Even some people that aren't on great terms with him, they're on better terms than they are with anyone else, like, for instance, Angren. Now, as a result here, you have Lionel Johnson, who Typhus even says that when Typhus at the Death Guard, when he meets him, like, it forced me to a knee. Like, I immediately wanted to bow, and I wanted to be supplicant to him. Whereas Horus, he said, yeah, well, I guess I could have bowed. His title, his station did deserve it. But that's important to talk about, how Lionel Johnson doesn't inspire hope and leadership. He inspires dread in individuals, not in the same way that Conrad Kurz does, but in the way that he is this individual that is looking to be the blade of the Emperor, right? To exact his vengeance upon the galaxy, or exact his his word upon the galaxy. And that's why he's chosen as Warmaster for Imperium Secundus. He does not want the mantle of leadership. Lion actually, when he finally rediscovers Macragge during the later portions of the Horus heresy, and he sees that Guilliman is setting up the Imperium Secundus because they both think that the Emperor is dead, he is want to take the title of, Emperor 2.0. He doesn't want that. And he is want to hand the title over to Sanguinius. I say, I'm not a leader. I'm not here to do that. He seems very at odds with that kind of human portion of who he is. In fact, that's what he uses Luther for. Luther was the charismatic portion of the duality in which is Lionel Johnson. Lionel Johnson is this great tactician, but he's not a great leader. That's what Luther was there for. But that's also what creates this huge kind of stain upon the Dark Angels. Because Luther was able to convert so many of them over to, his cause, which is ultimately chaos, it creates this kind of schism between Lionel Johnson, the Dark Angels, and the rest of the Imperium, where he kind of feels like, okay, there's no way I can truly be this great, altruistic leader because I already have this stain upon me. So, and of course, he's not aware of these things. I mean, this is just kind of a third person looking into this. But I think that the Lionel Johnson would have made a great wartime, not even leader, a wartime general. He would have made this great individual that would be strategizing and a tactical kind of mastermind. And that's why he wanted that Warmaster title for Imperium Secundus. But I don't think he had the charisma, the clout, or really the chops to hold it like Horus did. I don't think that Lionel Johnson would have fallen to chaos, and even if he did, I think that he would have taken far less brothers alongside with him. So I think that Lionel Johnson, while an amazing Primarch and one able to do almost the same amount of feats as Horus, he didn't quite make the cut. But there's another individual that does become the Emperor of Imperium Secundus, and he's the second one on our list here. And that is the mighty winged Sanguinius, my favorite Primarch next to Conrad Kurz. Two completely different Primarchs, right? But Sanguinius is seen as this kind of this brother that everyone gets along with. Everyone really likes Sanguinius. Even the Imperial people love Sanguinius. He's this ultimate symbol of what the Imperium has become or is becoming. He's not venerated as this kind of over-the-top angelic figure the way that we recognize him in our own society. There are portions of the Imperial Society that do kind of venerate him in that way, but he's quick to reprimand that, and he's quick to kind of dismiss it. But Sanguinius kind of looks at this. He looks like the most, worthwhile individual to be the Warmaster. He's beloved by all of his brothers. Well, the good majority of them. And he's beloved by the people. He's beloved by his own Marines, and he loves them back. Like, that's a very important thing, is each one of these Primarchs has a very special relationship with their legion. Whereas, Horus kind of looks at them as brothers and fellows in arms and say, hey, what would you do in this situation? And the Mournival, for the most part, for the Luna Wolves, is very much a means for Horus to kind of get a better perspective on situations. And you even look at the way that Lionel Johnson is with his brothers. I mean, this is a knightly order, essentially. There is a hierarchy to it, and that is kind of removes him from everything, but there is essentially a knightly brotherhood. And even Guilliman, he is seen as this ultimate kind of, hey, I listen to my legion, and they trust me. There's a lot of trust that goes on there. But there's a very kind of huge paternal bond that exists between the Blood Angels and Sanguinius, much in the same way that the Primarchs kind of have or hope to have with the Emperor of Mankind himself, Horus, especially in that instance. Now, when talking about Sanguinius, though, you look at people like Horus, who did say, Sanguinius should have been it. Horus and Sanguinius were extremely close. In fact, I would argue that Sanguinius let Horus in the most of any other Primarch. But that's the ultimate problem. Like I said, Horus was on pretty great terms with everyone. The Emperor knew that at the end of the day, if anyone was going to get someone to do something, another Primarch, it was going to be Horus. Sanguinius, while liked, he was also begrudgingly liked. When you look at Mortarion or Angron, they don't really like Sanguinius, like, oh yeah, he's such a good guy. They're like, you know what? He's so goddamn perfect. I mean, there's no reason for me to dislike him, but because of that, I dislike him. And it causes a lot of angst between them. And you have to understand, too, Sanguinius was very terrified of the prospect of the Red Thirst overwhelming his entire legion, his gene seed, the flaw in his gene seed. And he was very afraid that the Red Thirst would be another reason to sanction a third Primarch, a third legion. He was so terrified of it that it creates a lot of self-doubt in this Primarch that is supposed to kind of be seen as this very angelic, benevolent kind of doler of peace, goes out to the galaxy and saying, oh, here's a free planet, and here's a free planet. And all of his brothers are just not perfect in the way that, not brothers, all of his legion is perfect, not in the way that the Emperor's children are, but in this kind of sweeping Grecian, very over-the-top, sun-kissed skin with this golden hair and blue eyes. These very kind of statuesque-looking individuals, and that's the kind of legion that he runs, that he's kind of the face of, but with, of course, the darker side to it. Now, here's a good question. Would Sanguinius have been more susceptible to chaos than even Horus was? The Red Thirst is essentially like a blood craze that you could even say is influenced by Khorne. Fear to Tread, the book that pretty much focuses on the Blood Angels and Sanguinius, goes into that. What if, or how can we convert Sanguinius? Horus is so scared of Sanguinius and his ability to unify and his psychic abilities. He can see into the future, that he wants him converted immediately to chaos. He even tells Erebus, you're sure we can get Sanguinius? Because if we can't get Sanguinius, this entire thing is lost. And that they even tell him back is like, yeah, if we don't get the Red Angel, which also could be Angron, then there's no way we can win on Terra. So, Fear to Tread tackles that very much so. And I apologize for the dramatic pauses there. I'm still just a little sick. But Fear to Tread kind of tackles that, right? Where we have this greater demon of Khorne trying to convert all the Blood Angels over to being basically the beginning of Khorne berserkers, and in the ways that world eaters could never be, right? These kind of very cognitive berserkers. Now, what ends up happening is, and this is again Sanguinius' biggest flaw. He's most afraid that this is what's going to lead them to chaos, and in Fear to Tread, he defeats that. He faces it with the help of the librarians that he disbanded, that he is kind of like more pissed off at that they did anything than anything, but that's a different story. But he defeats this kind of self-doubt, this kink in his armor, as it were, and he goes on to keep his legion together, to go to the Imperium Secundus, to unfortunately take on the title of Emperor of Imperium Secundus, which he is, again, wants to do. No one wants to admit that the Emperor is dead at the time of Unremembered Empire. They're all like, you know what? I can't believe it. And Guilliman is pretty good at saying, like, no, this is what has to happen. So I think that, again, Sanguinius is a great right hand to a Warmaster, but I just don't think that he could really pull it off 100%. He is a great tactician, but not in the way that Horus Lupercal was. He was always at the thick of it. Go down the center. That was always, that's the motto of the Luna Wolves. Go for the throat. Whereas, there's a lot of flourish with the Blood Angels, and Sanguinius included. He's got wings, for fuck's sake. And on top of it, you get a Primarch that is very emotionally intelligent. And as a result, I'm sure that leads to a lot of emotional quandaries in what to do. Whereas Horus, for the most part, always kind of had well, up until a certain point, the Imperium's kind of best judgment in mind. But that does lead us on over to our third one here. Before I jump into that, I want to mention real quick a really cool theory that I looked up, or I was reading about, is that what if, since Sanguinius, that has a tongue twister, since Sanguinius and Horus were so close, what if the kink in Horus's armor, like the rent in Horus's armor that the Emperor was able to kill Horus through, was not actually a physical break in his armor? What if it was a emotional or a mental crack that allowed the true Horus to see through what he has become to give the Emperor an upper hand. And that's really the true role of Sanguinius. Sanguinius needed this kind of role to kind of be that anchor that helped propel the Emperor's fury into Horus to end the overall war. I think that's the role that he needed to be. Otherwise, who knows what could have happened. Now again, let's move over to our third one. The mighty master of the Ultramarines Legion, Robot Guilliman. Now, you guys know that I'm not a huge fan of Bobby G. I think he's a pretty vanilla Primarch. I'm not a huge fan of pretty much anything that he does. But I will give credit where credit's due. He's amazing at building empires. You look at the 500 worlds, all of the Ultima Segmentum, and how he has really created this mini empire within itself. And he is known for being this brilliant statesman, this great tactician. The Ultramarines always have, a lot, or what's it called, like a logical and a practical, or it's like a practical, and they basically look at two situations of, hey, this is what could happen, this is what probably should happen. They always have like a backup plan for a backup plan for a backup plan. That's represented in their 8th edition rule set of being able to kind of fire and retreat. They have all sorts of things that play into the ultimate kind of legion that Robot Guilliman has crafted. And while I did say that the Bloody Noodles are very Grecian, the Ultramarines are very like Grecian and Roman influence as far as their iconography, their naming mechanics even are very heavily in that direction. So you have a lot of that kind of going on, this very statuesque, very picturesque type of not only legion, but ways to instill a populace with some form of loyalty. I kept wanting to say legion. Loyalty to their home, their sovereign, which was the Imperium. And that's what Robot Guilliman did. Every planet he captured, he would establish a great structure before leaving it. He wouldn't just say, okay, it's captured, moving on. Okay, it's captured, moving on. Angren, looking at you. And he would solidify each one of these worlds so that they did not fall to some sort of rebellious ways. We know about some instances of planets that have been unified back into the Imperium actually falling, not to chaos per se, but to a rebellion of sorts against the new regime, stuff like that. That's what actually happens on Davin. Now, there's not many records of that happening with the Ultramarines because they're so damn good at it. And he's a great statesman, Horus bemoans dealing with the Administratum, with all of the regions of Terra, well, the Council of Terra, and he hates dealing with all these kind of the inner workings and the administrative side of being what the Warmaster entails. And he just doesn't want to do it. He actually, there's a lot of times where he gets fed up with dealing with, well, the region of Terra, since we brought him up, members of the Mechanicum, which he actually has a pretty good rapport with, though, for the most part, the Remembrancers, all human aspects of the Legion Crusades was a huge burden to Horus. Not so much for Robot Guilliman, for Rogel Dorn, individuals who understood what their role was, individuals who understood what the humans' roles, what the mortals' roles were in the Grand Cog of the Imperium. So you can really say that Robot Guilliman had a really good idea of, I'm just going to say Guilliman because I hate saying Robot. Guilliman had a really good idea of the greater picture, what the next step was for the Imperium. It was not to prosecute war endlessly. The Emperor knew that Guilliman was that kind of individual who, if all else fails, Guilliman could be the one to reestablish an empire. That's why he is charged with creating Imperium Secundus if the Imperium ever were to fall. Not because he's this great general who can lead from the front and pierce through the enemy lines and destroy all their fortifications. No, that was never his task. He was never the tool that was meant to lead. He was the tool that was meant to kind of cultivate the Imperium once it was finally established. The Great Crusade, you could argue, it would never truly end, right? That's why the Imperium would always need a Warmaster to prosecute war, but you would always need a statesman to kind of ferry and build and establish a structure to that Imperium that was built. That's what Guilliman's role was. So I think as a Warmaster, and the reason he's third on this list is because I think hands down, he could never beat the Warmaster. A lot of his brothers outright hated him. He did not have he did have the charisma with his own men, but he did not have the charisma with his own brothers. Even Rogel Dorn kind of looks down down his nose at Guilliman, and they're both in that same level of like the Emperor knows that both their places, and it's very close to building the infrastructure of the Imperium. But I mean, don't get me started on Lorgar and Guilliman. They do not like each other. But and Guilliman is even looked at by a modicum of doubt, or a lot of modicum of doubt, by Lionel Johnson. When Lionel Johnson finally comes into the system of Macragge and sees the Imperium Secundus being set up, he's immediately going, oh great, Guilliman has fallen to the chaos too. I'm gonna have to kill him. And he's very like want to listen to him, and his description of like, hey, when's the last time you heard from the Emperor? Can you even see the Astronomicon? I can't see the Emperor's light anymore either. So it takes a long time for Lionel Johnson even to warm up to Guilliman's Imperium Secundus, and it takes both of them to warm Sanguinius up to the thought of it. So Guilliman, I think, his tool, his purpose was to build the infrastructure of the Imperium, was to create the worlds that we see today. In fact, that's his biggest, like, not namesake, but that's his biggest gift to the galaxy, right? Is the Ultramarines, and then the following codex and how that's supposed to structure things and break things down. I guess you could say that also led to the extremely dogmatic, crazy, self-cannibalizing Imperium that we have today. But as he comes back from the kind of annals of history in the 8th edition, and he becomes this kind of new regent of Terra, more or less, ruling kind of in the Emperor's stead as the only loyalist Primarch to come back yet as of 1/6/2019. We see that he is falling into his role. He is re-solidifying and rebuilding the structure of the Imperium. He's not going out and creating no whole new swaths of territory. He's rebuilding what has been lost. He's rebuilding what has been destroyed or taken down so greatly. So we see that kind of exemplified thusly in the current lore that we did see in the previous lore. But that kind of concludes our 3 big candidates. And it begs the question, what does this all mean? I mean, it doesn't sound like you did anything in this video. Like, and that's my point. I think at the end of the day, the Warmaster could have only ever been Horus. All of his brothers liked him the most. If Sanguinius had fallen to chaos, Sanguinius would not have been able to take as many as Horus did. If Guilliman had fallen to chaos, go fuck off. Everyone would have been like, what? You started putting eyeliner on your eyes and you started getting pissed off at all of us? Get away, Guilliman. Go back to your 500 pretty planets. And I think that Horus, and that's why the Horus heresy is so effective, is because it was Horus that exacted it. None of his other brothers. There's no way you could have gotten Conrad, Mortarion, Perturabo, Angren, and Fulgrim to fall in line like they did with Horus. Granted, Fulgrim found a shiny goddamn sword and turned to chaos the first like spin of a hat, so he was pretty weak. He would never would have been on this list, that's for sure. But he was the only one to control the very loyal chapters, or I'm sorry, legions, and the very wayward ones. Conrad didn't like listening to anyone. Angren especially hated listening to everyone. Leman Russ was hated by both loyalists and non-loyalists, and that's the same thing of Lionel Johnson. Lionel Johnson and Leman Russ did not get along. These are things that the Emperor knew. He knew that a lot of his sons, quote unquote, were very hot-headed, but he knew that the Horus was the only one that could lead them the way that he did. And it's what makes the Horus heresy so tragic, is that he was the morning star. He was the brightest and the best of all of them. And he embodied a lot of the traits that each one have. So if you want to talk about 3 overwhelming traits, right? We'll talk about charisma and connection. The ability to kind of connect with your brothers, as the brothers being other Primarchs, as well as your legion. That's trait number 1. We'll talk about trait number 2, being able to inspire people, being able to lead them from the front. And then trait number 3, being able to have a plan, have a strategy, and exact that strategy. Horus is the only one of our 3 that has all 3 of those. Each one of them, I mean, you took a look at charisma. Lionel Johnson does not have that. Sanguinius, he doesn't have really the gumption to create an empire. And, well, Guilliman, you're not the one who's going to be leading from the front like the way Horus is. And you're not going to be the one who's going to be uniting your brothers against, again, the way that Horus is. So, I hope this video kind of confused you. But at the same time, I hope it was very fun and enlightening. And I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about other possible War Masters. Who do you think really would have led in a way that was similar to, or even better than Horus. Maybe Pharaoh's Manus, before his head was just chopped off, would have been a better candidate for Warmaster because of his, like, you know, calculated precision on things. Or maybe we can take a look at Vulcan, who does have that, like, you know, forearm slapping brother attitude that a lot of his other legion shares. Or who knows? It could have been the very enigmatic, very wayward Jagatai Khan. So tell me in the comment section what you're kind of thinking. Or if you think I'm just completely full of shit and this is, and it definitely should have been Lionel Johnson, or whatever you think here. I'd love to have a discourse here on this. And this is a hotly debated topic. And if you're just new into the 40k lore, this is something that people have been talking about for like 20 years. And it's just now finally getting more evidence to support certain podiums or certain stances, because the Horus Heresy is starting to flesh out those relationships between other Primarchs, or between Primarchs and their legions, or even the Primarchs and the Emperor. So thanks so much for watching here today, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video here. I had a lot of fun researching certain things about this. I have read Angels of Caliban and the Descent of Angels, and it still didn't dawn on me that Lionel Johnson has that nascent psychic ability to basically instill dread in people. I just thought that that was his personality trait, but it took me really diving into some of the text to realize, oh, this is a psychic ability of his. Even if he doesn't, even if it's like a Gestalt one that he doesn't actually control. So, and hey, you can even comment below how that's a total bullshit sentence. I'm happy with it. But as always, guys, thanks so much for watching here today. Have a good one. We got plenty of stuff here planned for you this week. But stay tuned, have a good one, and take care.